Welcome, 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 everybody, to Shoot the Gap, the Fantasy Football Podcast. Well, the IDP Fantasy Football Podcast here on the Fantasy and Frames Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. With me, we got Justin Taylor. And, we're doing our kind of year in review, just talking about things that we had noticed, trending in the 2024-2025 NFL season, fantasy football season to be exact. Got to be honest with you folks, we're just going to wing it. We're just going to talk about some IDPs that we like. We're going to talk about people that surprised us, people that kind of disappointed us. We're talking about the future, to touch a little bit on free agency, what to expect there, as well as our plans for what we're going to be doing on the show, this spring. So before we get into all that, JT, what's going on, man?
Hey there, just finally made it through the holidays. Absolutely freezing cold in my part of the world right now. Way colder temperatures than normal. My heat went out this weekend. It was an absolute disaster. It got down to like 45 in my house. It was pretty cold, so I had to abandon the house for a couple of days until I could get the part in to get my heater fixed. So it's been interesting, and then coached my first ever fifth, sixth grade boys basketball game on Tuesday night. So we were winning the whole game, and we lost at the end. We had a chance to win it at the buzzer, and got an inbounds pass knocked away and run down for a layup, and we ended up losing by 3. But we were in it for the whole time. So my son Walker got his first ever career basket, so that was a nice little highlight, and we'll kind of see how the rest of the season goes. We only had like 2 practices and about half the kids there at each practice, so didn't get to put any offense or do anything crazy. So I'm just basically staying on the sideline playing defense and subbing kids at this point. So it's all right though.
You coach football, you coach basketball. Like, what sport do you not coach?
I played everything growing up, so about the only thing I would not feel comfortable coaching, and even though I'm a big fan of it, I didn't play it, so strategy-wise would be tough for me, would be hockey. So I know hockey, I understand hockey, but, like, if I actually was, like, tasked with coaching hockey, I would definitely have to go to like a coaching clinic and be like, okay, how do I need to like coach these guys? 'Cause I understand like I could do like drills and like kind of set it up, but like I would have to talk through strategy of exactly different ways to do hockey. But I feel pretty confident that I could coach just about anything, especially I'd say at the the 5th, 6th grade junior high level where it's not too advanced. I think I can do all right there.
Yeah, I would be like that guy in Saturday Night Live who's like, as they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
All right, that's right, exactly.
That's as far as I could go there. No, man, I'm glad to hear you had a great holidays. I guess I did as well. I until the whole having pneumonia thing kicked in. That was fun.
And, brutal, right? I know I was like sick for a while too. I had a couple of weeks where I was just like, I was like not great. I was like fighting through a little bit, but man, I was like, every time I got up and did anything for a while, I was just toasted. I was like, I gotta sleep. I was just extremely tired, man. Yeah, I don't know about where you're at, but it hit here bad right before Christmas. Everybody got sick that I knew, and now the flu is going around in my town. My son said half of his class was gone the last 2 days as the flu has hit our neck of the woods.
Yeah, no, it went to like the blistering cold. It does this in DC. It goes blistering cold, and then it goes up to like the 50s and 60s, and then you're like, oh yeah, it's nice weather, and then it's like back to the blistering cold, and you're just asking to get sick. And I tried to stay away from my son during this time, who's just a baby. But now he's got a cold, and I'm just like, I'm like,
and you can't help it at that point. They just snot a lot, and they're just like, you can't help but be like, have them on you. It's just, as soon as you become a parent, I used to never get sick, and then my son, and then he started going to like daycare and going to different stuff, and like he started school, and I felt like I was getting sick like every other month after that.
No, it's. The joys of parenthood, as I'm discovering, most
you've got many more ahead of you, Jorge, many more. Gotta take the good with the bad, man. Gotta take the good with the bad.
Of course. And speaking of good, Let's focus on the bad. Let's focus on the good. Thank you very much, everybody who's tuning in on this fine Wednesday, the 15th of January, over on X and YouTube. You're with us up late talking as we talk some IDP fantasy football, as you always have this past year. Really appreciate support and your interaction. If you want to, ask questions, IDP questions, or just have random conversations, jump over to our YouTube channel, hit like and subscribe, and jump in the chat, and let's do that IDP. I do want to say, though, folks, we had been promising you something over the course of the year that tonight we are going to explain the results of. But the coup de grace is not coming until we do a Super Bowl preview show the Saturday night before the Super Bowl. A bunch of people here from Fantasy and Frames across different shows are going to come on here, and we're just going to talk about things either from, basically from like a real football perspective. We're going to talk about things from a betting perspective, a DFS perspective. It's the last time we all can sit around and talk football until, August, when there's, or September, when there's actual football being played, in that regard. So really looking forward to that. But what am I alluding to? We have a little segment here, and I'm going to play a little drop here that we do every week towards the end of every show. So for those of you who know, just bear with me as I repeat this. For those of you who are new or have not heard this before, at the end of every show here on Shoot the Gap, JT and I, we have our sack lunch segment. And so what goes on in the sack lunch segment is we both pick one player that we believe is definitely going to get you at least a sack in their upcoming matchups that week. And JT and I, over the course of each episode during the season, we have picked our players, and I have gone through the list of episodes where we picked players. There was a few episodes.
And I will let people. I have no idea what the results are. We were not keeping track during the year. Jorge, you went back and added it all up. I'm like kind of in anticipation here. I want to know how. I'm not sure how good I did. I can't remember.
Well, you're gonna find out, and I'm gonna let people know. But anyhow, the gist of where I'm going with this is that the loser would take a pie in the face. Not doing a pie in the face tonight. We will do it on the Super Bowl preview show on the 8th of February. So I'm just looking forward to that. But anywho, there's just so much to talk about. There's so much to dive into. A lot of the times here at Fantasy and Frames for IDP, from a fantasy points perspective, we've been using Fantasy Pros scoring, just because those stats are, very easy for anybody to look up and kind of track where their players on their rosters are doing and performing compared to other players in their league. So I guess why don't we just start there, JT, and just start talking about people like that surprised us, at defensive line, linebacker, defensive back, in terms of their points per game and their production in general. For me, let me start off here with the linebacker position. A week before the Rio game with the Eagles and the Packers, all the hubbub was about, there's this Zach Bond guy. You should really pay attention to him. If he's available, pick him up. We hear good things, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, another last minute thing to think about. No thanks. I got my roster set. Well, for those of you who didn't think like that and grabbed him, week one, he got you 15 total tackles, 2 sacks, and using Fantasy Pro scoring 30 points per game. And he was fairly consistent over the course of the season in getting you really double-digit tackles or double-digit fantasy points, especially a lot of games giving you over 20-plus fantasy points. According to Mike Clay over at ESPN, he on Twitter, or X now, put out a cheat sheet of unrestricted free agents, and the number 2 graded linebacker in this free agent class that he has listed is Zach Bond. So I'm going to ask you, JT, from a dynasty first and then a redraft perspective. At the linebacker position, are you going for dynasty? Are you trying to get Zach Bond, or are you just going to kind of play to the strengths of your bench and the depth that you have? Because linebacker tends to be a deep position.
Yeah, Bond's a very interesting guy. If you go back and you kind of want to look at what he had done through his career before he got here, I mean, we know Philly kind of fell apart. They just had a bunch of injuries. The linebacker were trying to figure it out. Former third round pick in 2020 out of Wisconsin. He didn't really work out as early, his early in New Orleans. Ends up here on Philly after a couple years in New Orleans where he was like, I mean, absolutely meh. I mean, he was more of an edge rusher. He had a career high of 2 sacks in 2023. He also had his career high, his most tackles ever was 32 in 2021, his second year. And that year he had no sacks, anything else. So, I mean, literally, he just came out of nowhere this year as they moved into an off the ball linebacker. Just an absolute monster year. He's 28 years old. Slightly undersized, a linebacker, 6'3", 225, but I mean, the guy had an absolute monster year. The really interesting thing for him for dynasty purposes is where is he going to end up? Did the Eagles sign him back? Did he do enough to there with his not great track record beyond this year? Does he get paid a lot of money, or does he take a little bit less because teams are worried about like one hit wonder with him?
Right.
If he ends back on the Eagles, I think he's an absolute buyer, a guy you want to either hold on to or go after. It's going to be interesting if he ends up in a different system on another team. I have to be honest with you. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, but I am not going to be like out there absolutely trying to go get him. Like, I just, you hope that he maintains this momentum from this year, but man, if he changes scenery, I don't know if that happens. Now, is he like a Robert Spillane, where like couldn't just totally get on the field with the Steelers, goes to the Raiders, and then tears it up ever since he's been the Raiders? Is it going to be one of those situations where, hey, he's going to go to a new team and he's going to get the same you got this year? Maybe, but man, I tell you what, if you got him and picked him up before the season, he had to be the waiver wire pickup of the year. I mean, because if you got him early on, I mean, he had just an absolute monster season. I think you mentioned it in Fantasy Pro scoring. He was the number 2 overall linebacker, over 16 points a game, 258.3 points. I mean, monster season, 150 tackles, added sacks, added forced fumbles, he did a little bit of everything for them this year. So he to me was the surprise of the year, the waiver wire. I'm looking over my dynasty rankings on DLF that I'm going to be updating here in the next week or two. He's a guy that I'm really going to have to think about. Like, I really got to think where I'm going to have him ranked in dynasty wise. Because, again, a great season, but where does he end up? And at 28, was this just the beginning? And he's like, oh, he found his rhythm. He knows he's doing, this guy's going to be a stud for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Or is it like, oh, we look back in 5 years and we're like, man, remember that one Zach Bond season? Remember that one year he just tore it up out of nowhere? I'm a little nervous about it. I definitely do not want to overpay for him here this offseason.
Yeah, I think for me, I get a little weary of spike guys that have a track record and that's not great. And then all of a sudden, boom, they have that 1 year. Oh, coincidence. They're going to be free agents the following year. And I know that there's not really any real merit to that statement, but it does seem to happen a lot that people, before they get their big contract, overperform from what they normally do. And then once they get the contract, they kind of fade away. There's no, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know that there's any like statistical proof that backs that up. But folks, we've seen it all happen before. For Dynasty, I don't know if I'm going after him, even if he stays with Philadelphia, because I don't know if I can trust the one good spike year. Now, for redraft, I would be more willing to if he stays in Philadelphia, grab him and just see what happens, because there is a lot of depth in redraft for the linebacker position. Those are just, okay. So those are my thoughts here. Oh, Jamie's in the chat. The level of inappropriateness is about to go to a whole new level.
Jamie, welcome. Good to see you, man.
He says in his league, he starts 2 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 2 defensive backs, and 1 flex. Okay, keeping that in mind. He has a trade question, super flex league. His 102, 104, his 102 for the 104 Josh Metellus, Boye Mafe, and 303. Seems like it's good value, but is it worth giving up JT or Tet in the rookie drafts? What are your thoughts here, JT?
Yeah, that one's a little toughy. I look at my roster, see what I need. Like, I'm in a couple leagues where I've got a bunch of CMC, and I'm like, I obviously my team fell apart without him, and I'm like right on that verge of that 102 to 104, and I'm like, I don't have any 101s, so I'm like, I don't think I'm going to get GT anywhere, but I'm in a couple 2 QB leagues where teams get real desperate for quarterback, and there's a chance that one of those 2 guys fall to me at 104. So that is a toughie, because I do think GT and Ted McMillan, wide receiver out of Arizona, I think they are the top 2. They really are the top 2. If I needed QB, I'm a little weak at QB. I don't mind making that move, because I think I could get Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward at 104. And if you need some help on defense, I do like both those players. 303 I like a lot this year. I do think there's going to be some solid running backs. A couple of the mocks I've run, there's some guys I really like at 303 that you can go RB there for sure. And maybe like top end defensive guy, depending on how your league is. I have a few leagues that will draft defense that high. A couple of leagues won't get into defense till round 4 or 5. At 102, I would look at the guy in front of me, honestly. If he looks like he's probably taking GT, I do like Ted a ton, but I do like Luther Burden, and I know I'm such of a homer because I'm a Missouri guy. I love Luther Burden, and I think people are slightly down because of the stats this year, but he showed you he could do everything the year before. Their offense just wasn't humming. Their quarterback was dealing with injury all year. It was just a little bit of a mess at Mizzou this year. So his stats suffered. He was sick, injured a couple times. I just don't think he was fully healthy. If I can move down and still get Burden, because I do think Burden's closer to the Tet than people are gonna admit. I wouldn't mind that, especially if I need the extra defensive help. If I need the extra defensive help, I don't mind moving down 2 slots, adding those guys, and adding the 3-3. But that again, that tells to me how much do you love Tet. If you can get GT at 102, you think he's going to go QB or Tet. I don't think I make the trade, to be honest with you, if I think I'm getting GT at 1-2. But if it's Tet, I just don't think Burden's that far of a drop off. Or if you're good with taking a QB, I wouldn't mind moving down to 1-4 and taking one of the QBs.
John McGlynn, good old buddy John. Luther
Hey,
Burden
Johnny.
Here in Tampa, taking over Chris Godwin's role. So here's my thought process when it comes
if
to
Burden makes it that far. I don't know if he gets all the way down to Tampa. That'd be I would be super mad if he got past the Steelers and the Bucks got him. No, that would be a great landing spot in Tampa. I'd be pissed if he got all the way to the Steelers and they didn't take him.
Right. So a couple things. And this could be a little peek into my philosophy with Dynasty. And I'll give you a perfect example. Last year in the Fantasy and Frames Dynasty League that you and I are both a part of, I had 3 or 4 second round picks, a couple thirds in the 4th and 5th. Out of the, what did I say, 4 second round picks, I gave up 3 second-round picks to move up to 106 to get Brock Bowers. Now, could I have filled up my team with depth? Absolutely. But I don't pass up on elite. So if you have the 102 and you think JT is going to be available or Tet, I take the elite player. You can always find. Look, Josh Metellus is great. He plays close to the line of scrimmage this past year. He was getting you the tackle numbers. Boye Mafe, he's not like a super elite IDP edge rusher. The 303 at that point, depending on how things are going to be folding out once everybody's declared, and we get ideas of where rookie drafts are going and mock drafts are going. What does the value of the 303 really mean? I don't know. I would be hard to press to give up my 102 if I can get one of the most elite players in this rookie class. But again, if you feel that your roster is depleted, that is the only rationale I think you could make for me wanting to accept this trade.
Yeah, I just looked in here and Jamie said in the chat, he says that the guy that has 101 has only one QB and he's old. So if he ends up going QB there and you've got 3, he says, I've got 3 good QBs. I don't think I move the 102 then. If there's any chance he goes, Cam Ward goes number 1 and then he jumps on Cam Ward, you got to hold on to 102 if you have a shot at GT. I think that's just my personal opinion. I wouldn't move anything there. Now, Jamie, I will tell you, this is a non-IDP league I moved last year. I moved off the 102 to the 104, and I was able to get the 108 in return as well. So I moved 2 spots back and was able to get another first rounder, a late first. So I do think you could hold out for better there. So I definitely wouldn't pull the trigger on that trade just yet. Like I would want to wait on some landing spots and some things like that. And again, if you have any shot at GT at 102, I think I hold.
So thank you very much, Jamie, for the chat. Excuse me for the question in the chat. For those of you watching, if you have any more, head over to our YouTube channel and chat with us. Let's talk some football and let's talk about whatever you want. He says, thanks. I think I'll hold. Steve Hungarter is the one making the offer, so I'll make him sweat it out. Yes.
You got to make him work it. You got to make him work harder than that, baby. Come on now. Got the IDP Hunter. You got to make him give you better IDP than that if that's the case.
As a friend of the show and friend of us here, give Steve all the hell you can. With love, heart to heart, Jorge.
That's fantastic.
Let's keep going down this list of linebackers in terms of where they finish and people that just are kind of surprising for the most part. I thought Caden Ellis's progression this year was very, very impressive. You look at some of his, PFF metrics, whether it comes to defensive stops or, the tackles. The missed tackle percentage is high. I'm not going to sit here that it's not great. 13.2%. Obviously, you'd like to see that come a little bit, obviously below double digits. But, he is one of the better rated run defensive, linebackers. He was very solid on a very average, or some might say below average Falcons defense. And that's kind of what call me crazy. Is that like not the ideal scenario for IDP? Because it's kind of like, give me a bad defense that's going to be exposed every week and give me the best player on the bad defense. Cause at least, that they're going to be getting a majority of the work.
I agree with you. I mean, it's hard to say you don't always want the best guys on the best defenses because those defenses are getting you 3s and outs. They're getting a 3 and out and they're off the freaking field. Where you got these other defenses like, and I will talk about this, I'm sure, a lot here as the show goes on. But the Colts were a prime example of a team where like, are these guys elite or are they an elite situation where they're on the field all the time and all of them are getting tackles because they never can get off the field? So it's sometimes it's that crazy scenario in IDP. I always related a little bit to hockey. in that the teams that have the best defense in hockey, you don't necessarily want those players. You don't necessarily want the best defenders in hockey because those guys don't give up anything. They're shutting you down, so they're not getting a ton of stats, and that's why they're so good. When they get zero, they're almost like shut down cornerbacks. When they get no one throwing at them, no one going after them, it's because they're so good. They don't let you get any stats, and so they don't get any stats. So you got to play that mix between the guys that are elite defenders on really good defenses and those guys that can get you points because they're on just a bad enough defense that they're making enough plays for you. But I loved Ellis. I had him in a ton of leagues, and I thought it was, I've always been a huge Troy Anderson guy. So, like, he was the guy I loved for them. I've wanted him everywhere. He couldn't stay healthy again this year. We saw what he can do. He had some monster games this year, but he couldn't stay healthy again. And that whole linebacker room has been a mess in Atlanta. Who's the guy you really want? I think Caden Ellis answered it finally this year. I think he's got that job, and I don't think it's going anywhere. I think he's a guy you want to
have. 100% agree there. Let me pull up something really quickly because I wanted to make sure I don't speak out of line here. Okay, perfect. So one of the things I really enjoyed about Caden Ellis's game was when he was in New Orleans before he came over to the Falcons via free agency. And that is, you had Demario Davis there, you had Pete Werner there, but Pete Werner was dealing with some injuries, and so Caden Ellis would come in. And one of the impressive things that caught my eye about Caden Ellis is that not only was he a good off-ball linebacker, but he actually was asked to rush the passer a lot. And I was wondering when free agency came around, this is before they acquired Matthew Judon, and Arnold Ebiketie kind of started to do a little bit more in that department. I was wondering, is Caden Ellis like the best, pass rusher that the Falcons have? And I look back to this past year, he led all the linebackers in pressures with 43. Let me go to looking at the individual team stats right here for every position. He led all defensive players that played at least 20% of snaps this past year for the Atlanta Falcons, and pressures was 43. He was second on the team with sacks with 5. And of course he led the team in total tackles, like Swiss Army knife, just a complete Swiss Army knife. Very refreshing to see. Definitely somebody who has LB1 upside, but probably because of name value or the lack of name value, you could probably get him in the later rounds and kind of punt linebacker and wait till you can scoop up a Caden Ellis. Until, of course, we talk him up in the preseason and people watch the show and they're like, oh, look at Caden Ellis. And it's like, well, there goes the value.
Well, I mean, Fantasy Pro scoring, he was number 4 overall, 232.8 points, 13.7 points per game, right behind Spillane, Bond, and Zaire Franklin. I mean, a guy that I think some people skipped on. You look at Fantasy Pro scoring was a little bit lower because the way they do tackles, but he was at 9 points or above in every game but 2 this year. Every game but 2, he had 9 points or more, and he went on a streak from week 8 to week 17 where he was averaging close to 16 points a game from week 8 to 17. So he crushed at the end of the year too. He just got better and better and better. And I have a league, one of the home leagues that I run, my home IDP league. He was the number 4 overall defensive scorer, and we're a pretty high scoring league that gives a lot of points for sacks. So a lot of times defensive ends will sneak up there. He was number 4 overall. And in that league, he never, for me, because we do just slightly higher tackle points per tackle than Fantasy Pros does, his lowest point total on the year was 10. In every other game, he had 13 points or more. Like he was absolutely fantastic this year. And he was a guy that was, if you took him, he was a kind of like one of those afterthought guys for a lot of people in leagues. Were like, I missed out on Troy Anderson. I'm looking for another linebacker who's still out there that starts. Oh, I'll take Caden Ellis.
Right. Speaking of leagues, Wanted to give a shout out to the winner of the Shoot the Gap podcast league that we had last year or this past season. And we've seen him on Fantasy and Frames programming in the chat before with a score of 241.50 to 207. Our podcast league champion, Brocal 44. Congratulations, Brocal. You'll be getting your Dynasty decks plaque commemorating your championship victory. Everybody who participated in the Shoot the Gap podcast league, first of all, thank you. It's great that you all just love IDP so much and you want to give it a try. And we try to make it as unique as possible in terms of scoring and just really amp up everything and just let utter chaos find its way to your rosters each week. And you navigated the storm and Brocal. I mean, congratulations. That's all I can really say there. Let's get to something. Let's get to out of rhythm. So, hold on. Let's get to John's question here. Can you review the scoring from the IDP Leftovers League JT and I are in? If JT, you can pull that up.
I've got it. Yep, I've got it pulled up here. I saw that he was asking that question. I pulled it up. So this is a league that me and John started for people that were newbies for the most part to IDP that want to kind of get a shot. It was the idea that, we're going to draft a 1-year redraft league for people to kind of get the feel. And then we would go back and redraft it for a full IDP Dynasty league later. But a lot of guys, and I think this is not a terrible idea. A lot of guys were nervous. They didn't want to go all in, jump into a Dynasty, never had played IDP, and then be like, oh, I screwed up my team forever because I didn't know what I was doing because I'd never played IDP, and now I hate my team, and now this league is no fun. So what we did was we kind of set up the league, some random scoring, and kind of did some of this stuff to try to get guys a shot, at hey, here's IDP, here's a taste, see if you like it. So I'll run down the scoring we kind of did for this league. A little bit higher scoring because, again, we wanted to kind of make it fun and do a little different. We did 6 points for a touchdown, obviously. We really cranked it up, 6 points per sack. We also did a 0.1 point per sack yards lost. So bigger, longer, deeper sacks got you more points. We gave you 1 point for a QB hit. We did 2 points for a tackle for loss, 3 points for any block, punt, field goal, any of that stuff. Interception was also 6. Interception return points was 0.1 per 10 yards. 3 points for a fumble recovery. Also, your yardage, same thing, 0.1 on the recover yards return. 3 points for a forced fumble. So if you forced a fumble and got a recover, you got 6 plus the sack gave you 12. So just to kind of give you guys an idea where we're at, we had some big weeks. Solo tackles were 2, assisted tackles were 1, and then we did passes defended 3 points for everybody. So really kind of cranked it up there. What do you think, Jorge? Obviously the sacks and the interceptions are up there big with the 6 points per each. Kind of thoughts on that. We were kind of playing around with the scoring. We kind of went big year one, and then we're trying to decide if we wanted to bring it back down a little bit after the initial year.
So here's my stance on IDP scoring. Whenever I've created a scoring system, and way back years ago here at Fantasy and Frames, we had our Fantasy and Frames IDP scoring. And one of the things, and so any kind of league we sponsored, we would always have that type of scoring for IDP. Years ago, long gone. Hail Fantasy Pros. But any scoring setting you guys like, guys and gals like, that's what matters the most, is that you enjoy the scoring setting. Back to this scoring setting. I always want scoring settings to be where defensive linemen, linebackers, and defensive backs are comparable in what they're able to average or total at the end of the year in terms of fantasy points. So I want there to be enough opportunity that a defensive lineman, defensive linemen in certain leagues like the Fantasy Pros League, Fantasy Pro scoring, they fall off a cliff pretty early. After you get past 10, then you're getting into the single digits of fantasy points. And linebacker, meanwhile, you can get to the linebacker, 35, and they're still averaging double-digit fantasy points. So if I can get a league where those 6 points for sack could help make my fantasy performance of a defensive lineman comparable to a linebacker, I'm all about it. Same thing goes for a defensive back with those impact plays like the 3 points for the pass deflection with 6 points for interceptions. Like I want the offensive backs, which are normally considered, in JT, you and I know this more so than any group here in IDP circles, they're considered the bastard children of IDP. And you and I last year were talking about how defensive backs, they have their role and they can help you win titles, and they should not be overlooked whatsoever. So I really like the scoring setting that you guys have here. And what's really cool about this is that just from what I'm hearing, is this just an all IDP league, or is this offense and
Nope, it's offense and defense. So I was going to tell you, I was going to give you a little bit of scoring because we also gave a bunch of bonuses on offense. So even though the defense scoring was really high, we did give a bunch of bonuses on offense. So to give you a little bit of context, Lamar Jackson was the number one scorer in the league, and he scored 663 points. So he scored 1 million. So, but if you break it down overall, he was 600. Joe Burrow was 600. Then you got, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, those guys were like in the 580s. Saquon was 537. Then you had a bunch of the other quarterbacks, 500 for Derrick Henry. Jamar Chase had 500. Bijan had 500. So those were kind of the top guys on the list. If you will go down to our top defensive scorer in the league, again, pretty high scoring for all these guys, 500, 400 points. But Bucky Irving and Joe Mixon were number 34, 35. Jordan Love was number 33, 360 points for all of them. Zaire Franklin, number 36 overall in the whole league, he had 360. So Zaire Franklin, who was the top defensive scorer, was right there with Jordan Love, Chase Brown, Joe Mixon, Bucky Irvin, outscored George Kittle and Drake London. You go down a little bit farther than that, a couple more wide receivers, running backs, that type of stuff. And then you run into like a Zach Bond was number 49 in the league, 328 points. So the real top end guys scored through the roof. But if you look at wide receivers, tight ends, outside of the top 2 or 3 guys that scored like 400 points, you were looking in the 350 range, 300, 350 for the top 15, 20 guys. Well, you go to defensive line for us, number 1 was Van Ginkel, 313 points. Trey Hendrickson was number 2, just under 300 points. So these guys were not that many points behind like a Malik Neighbors. TJ Watt, 280. Nick Benito, 278. Garrett, 270. So these guys are right there. Linebacker was a little higher. Like I said, Franklin, 360. Bond, 328. Caden Ellis, 321. Spillane, 318. You got down to linebacker 20 was Bobby Wagner with 269 points. And then DB, Buda Baker led the way with 313. Then you had like Brian Branch with like 296, Nick Cross, 288. And then number 20 DB was Jalen Jones with 223. So it was a high scoring league overall, but I actually thought it worked out pretty well. That these the defensive guys scored pretty well. And the way we did this league was super flex league, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex spots. And then defensively, we did 3 D line, 3 linebacker, 2 DB, and 2 flex is how we ran this league. So
I love this. I like it when all the different IDP positions can be somewhat, on par with one another. And I love it when you can incorporate that to offense. And it's not just like, offense takes precedence and priority because we're used to offense and we don't know IDP. And it's like, we're already at that point. We haven't even started the season yet. We've already devalued IDPs. I love it when they're all mixed together and you can find value because that helps with trades. That helps with player assessments. Like, what should I trade this linebacker for this wide receiver? Well, how are they performing? Yes, you should, or something vice versa. So,
and I definitely think because we had to play 3 D line because it was on sleeper, we had to play 3 D line. Obviously, you can play the D line linebacker / edge guys were very important because you had 3 D line spots, which I think was very important. But the fact that you did have 3 linebackers too, I mean, I always tell people when you really lower the amount of IDP guys, you're just devaluing defense because you can go on the waiver wire and pick up guys really easy if you're not going to play a bunch of defensive players. So the more you play defense, the more you have to go, okay, well, can I just ignore D line if I have to play 3 D linemen every week? It's like I can't just go to the waiver wire and get a guy off the D line in a pretty big league and just grab a guy to play out of nowhere every week. Like you're just going to eat points if you do that. So I thought it was pretty cool. We went a little higher than most of the leagues I run. I just kind of wanted to see how the mix worked out on it. And again, like I said, number 1 defensive guy, the top offensive guy almost doubled him in points, but it was really the top 2 quarterbacks. And from there, I mean, we had 5, 6, 7 defensive guys in the top 50, which I always think is nice when you can get a handful of guys in the top 50 there on defense.
Yeah, I to answer John your question, I like the scoring. The important question is, do you like the scoring? I could sit here and tell you all day why I like the scoring, but you all got to decide whether or not you like it, if you feel comfortable with it, if you understand the strategy of knowing which players to pick. I keep, like I said, whatever scoring keeps your offensive defensive players relatively even and your defensive players, even throughout their different categories, all 4. Speaking of people, you can just go off of the waiver wire at defensive lineman. Let's talk about Adam Rhythm's comment here. Nick Benito, he says, was never rostered anywhere, and he was the 5th highest fantasy points total, fantasy pro scoring. Let's go in terms of points per game. He was number 4 with 11.2. Yeah, you have Jonathan Cooper on one side. You have Nick Benito. You have Baron Browning and Benito were rotating all throughout the season. Then all of a sudden, Baron Browning gets traded to the Arizona Cardinals, and all of a sudden, holy crap, Nick Benito just is like, I'm assuming the majority of snaps here on the other side of the defensive line. And this guy, since week 10, 11 points, 21.3, 17 and a half, 22, 24.5, 2, 3, 17.5. I mean, just unbelievable.
It's like everybody kept feeling like, okay, eventually he's going to stop getting sacks and like he doesn't give you a ton of tackles. And so he's going to just kind of fall off. And I think that's what I felt like everybody was doing. And I had him on a team where I had a pretty good defensive end group. And I was like, every week I was like, man, because I had like him, TJ Watt, I had Alex Highsmith, I had Matt Judon, a couple other guys. I mean, pretty good guys I can play at D end. And it was like every week I was like, man, do we play Benito? Do we play Benito? And then eventually I was like, I think we just got to keep playing him every week. I'm like, trying to guess when he's going to get sacked and not. And then all of a sudden, you know what? He just was getting a sack every week. So it didn't matter. You weren't guessing anymore. It was just like play him, sit him. And I just think people just kept thinking it wasn't going to happen. And it just kept happening. He was, if you had him, I tell you what, I had him in a league and we were real deep and we had some injuries and we were trying to decide at the beginning of the year who to cut. And he was like one of the last guys that we held on to. I'm freaking really glad I didn't get rid of him because we would have been scrambling to try to pick him back up right away. So that was a good no cut from us. I think we ended up dropping like a deeper wide receiver and like a safety instead. So I'm glad we ended up keeping him because he ended up being pretty huge for us.
Out of Rhythm goes on to say, how does a guy like Robert Swain never get rostered? And he was the 4th highest linebacker. I had him rostered. I punted linebacker very, very much so during like a lot of my home leagues. And I saw Robert Swain available. I was like, scoop. Yep. Boom. Thank you very much. I'll take another.
Yeah. I mean, Spillane, he's just one of those guys is just consistently underrated. It's just one of those guys. He gets you the stats and people are just like, they don't believe that it's just going to keep happening year to year. And he just keeps doing it. Oh, Out of Rhythm also jumped in here. He said he does 6 points for a sack and gives you an extra 2 once you get 2 or more sacks. I actually like that. That's a nice little bonus in there. I did see Sleeper, and I don't have any leagues that I run on Sleeper. As far as IDP leagues, all mine are on My Fantasy and RSO. But I
Right.
did see Sleeper added like some 10 tackle bonuses and some different things where you could actually do some IDP bonuses, which I thought were kind of cool. Because in the past there wasn't many IDP bonuses you could actually do like that. So I like that one Out of Rhythm. That's a nice one.
So there definitely are bonuses. And to Jamie's next point here, giving his feedback on the Shoot the Gap podcast league. I'm not a fan of the team defensive scoring. I had a team defense score over 100 points. That's where those bonuses come in handy. And then the same defense scores 15 the next week. Hey, I mean, that's part of the crapshoot, the unpredictability. Obviously we'll look at all that formatting style as we get closer to August and how we want to set it up.
That one might have to be adjusted. Who knows? I'm in another league with a few guys I know from Dynasty Pros and stuff, and we do IDP plus a team defense, and the team defense consistently, if you have a good defense, is projected for somewhere to 30 to 40 points a week. So like if
Right.
you do have like a 15 or 20 point week, it like hurts you because like you're expecting to get like a big week out of that team, which I had never done that. I have to be honest, I never done that until last year where I actually did IDP and a team defense, and I actually kind of liked it. I thought it was kind of cool, especially because you always think about stacks on offense when you can stack and get that double up with wide out, wide receiver and quarterback or tight end quarterback, whatever. But I'm like, what if I had the Steelers and I have TJ Watt and I have, Minka Fitzpatrick or Patrick Queen? Like, I'm like, oh, if they have a huge game, then like I'm getting those double points for my team defense. I was like, I like this. I was like, this is cool. So I actually thought that was a nice little wrinkle.
This is a couple of years ago. I think it was not this year, but the past year. One of my friends was migrating from ESPN to Sleeper, and let's just say the commissioners didn't do a great job, and I'm saying that very, very nicely, of transferring the scoring settings over. So after week one, the team that was scored the most points was aided by the fact that the Dallas Cowboys DST got 110 points that week. And they were like, okay, obviously things need to be adjusted. And I was one of those proponents who was saying, league's already started. The season's already started. This should have been voted upon and looked over before you all started the league. Changing it now, you're starting to screw with, who won and where do you draw the line with that, so on and so forth. And I thought to myself, that is a unique twist where you finally show some respect to DSTs where they're actually super valuable and you have to plan accordingly based off of, like you were saying, like the stacks of players. And I thought it was a unique way to play fantasy, looking at it from a perspective, because you're now reevaluating and going against what we normally look at as far as like the shoe-ins for crazy production. Going back to John McGlynn here, Jesus, John, just let it go. What else would you add on defense to make the league better? A positive attitude, because your league is fantastic. The league scoring is great.
I've got John. I got him in IDP and into some like the college side this year. He really did like the campus to Canton. The IDP is still a little iffy on John. John's like, I'm still working my way through it. I like the scoring we do. I actually think, if anything, John, that the way when I went back and re-looked at the scoring, I think we maybe leave I like where the defense is at. I think we maybe slightly knock off some of the bonuses for offense to even it out just a hair, but it's pretty nice. I like it. It was a lot of points, but I think I'm one of those people. I'm a give me more points person. I remember playing in those leagues where you didn't get a point unless your guy had 100 yards rushing and receiving. You didn't get a point unless you had a touchdown. And I just remember looking at weeks and I'm like, I just lost 42 to 37 and just being like, what? It's like, I just, those leagues drive me nuts. So I'm always about the scoring, but John, we'll talk about that. We'll go through some more. I think we can maybe knock down a little bit of the offensive scoring, but I liked where we at defensively. If you looked at it, whenever I look at it, is if your top linebacker, your top D line, and your top safety all have over the same threshold, which in our league was 300 points. I think that's nice. If you have 3 to 5 guys in that top threshold in each area, to me, I feel like the scoring is working and making those guys more valuable, especially when you go back and look at it as a dynasty startup. Like if you bring the league in, now people can kind of see where guys scored, and it makes more sense. And you're going to get a lot more variety on the startup draft now that people have an idea how many points defensive guys can actually score.
Let's see here. Out of Rhythm is inviting us to an IDP league, an auction IDP league. I have never done an auction IDP league. That sounds like a lot of fun.
I have to tell you, the only auction IDP league I ever did was my first IDP Dynasty league that I set up like 15 years ago now, I think it was. We had never done, no one in my league had ever done auction, and no one in my league had ever played IDP, and no one in my league had ever played Dynasty. And we just went right at it with all of them. We set up one league. It was like a 6-hour draft when we started it, because it was auction. It was just taking forever, and we had to do defensive guys and everything. It was wild. We go back and look at it now and see some of the prices we paid for some guys, and are like, what were we doing? But it was fun because no one had any idea what they were doing. So it was kind of crazy. But that would be fun. I have not been in one since that startup one I did 15 years ago.
Speaking of what are we doing, let's touch on a two duos in terms of pass rushers. Danielle Hunter leaves and goes to Houston. Minnesota's response: we're going to get, Houston, formerly Houston's Jonathan Grenard, and we're going to bring Van Ginkel over from Miami. What are we doing? What could we possibly expect from Andrew Van Ginkel or Jonathan Grenard? And can either of them replace the production that Danielle Hunter, who was a dominant force at edge in Minnesota, can we replace him? And you look back to the stats this past year in terms of sacks, both Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, double-digit sacks. You go to looking at Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, double-digit sacks. That, to me, the Van Ginkel Grenard combo is probably one of the most surprising things for me I noticed in IDP Fantasy Football this year.
Yeah, the fact that they, we were just looking at Houston, and that was a great combo, and everybody thought it. But you're like, this is going to be one of the best pass rushing duos in the whole league. And then you're like, what is Minnesota doing? And then all of a sudden, to get those two guys just to have a monster year was pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. And kudos to Will Anderson taking the next step the following year. Just great. Well, let me ask you a question. Obviously, Will Anderson carries name value. Obviously, Danielle Hunter carries name value. Grenard and Van Ginkel, they made their presence known, obviously, but they're not as big as name values amongst IDP players or newbies to IDP than Anderson and Hunter. Would you, as an IDP manager, knowing how shallow defensive line is, right? Do you just say, F it, I'm going to go pay high cost for in redraft? Let's just talk about redraft for a second. In redraft, would you just go ahead and say, I'm getting the best deals I can first, so give me Hunter, give me Will Anderson, and then I'll deal with linebacker later? Or are you going to be like, no, I want to tackle, get it linebackers, and then go and get value at Van Ginkel and Grenard? What is your thought process there?
Obviously we're a little ways off from everybody's rankings coming out, especially for redraft to start the year. But man, even though Van Ginkel and Grenard had great years, I still think we're going to go in next year with them getting kind of getting shafted. I think they're going to get drafted way lower than they should after this year. I just really do. I think you're going to end up seeing Anderson and Hunter go rounds and rounds ahead of those guys. Man, I tell you what, that's definitely going to be one of my thought processes this offseason is like, do I sit back, try to take some of the bigger tackle guys that I think are going to be there, and then maybe grab these guys a couple rounds later.
Right.
It's tough, that's why we play fantasy. Though it's crazy. I mean, I did a couple charity leagues this year where I went linebacker early. I mean, earlier than I normally would. And I was trying to really eat up defense early and get like absolute stud because it was an overall points league. And man, none of my guys got hurt. I went Duque and I went like Roquan Smith like super early, and then they both played like okay and got hurt. And I was just like, man, I was looking at it later. I was like, dude, I could have went like 7-8 rounds later and taken like Robert Spillane, and I'd have been better off. So it's like, I mean, it's just some of those times where you just look at it, and it's like, that one's a toughie. So I always think in those, especially in redrafts, you just want to you gotta want to try to be the guy at the start of the run instead of the end of the run. But you just got to kind of feel out where everybody else is at, like how quickly you think they're going to jump in there and take somebody. But I think those two Vikings guys, I really do. I think some people are going to overlook it and look at the season and go, it's a little bit luck. Can they repeat? Can they do that again? And I think you're going to get them maybe a little later than they should probably really go.
Before we get into some disappointments here, let's talk about players that, man, we just feel bad for them. Like they crushed us. What happened? And obviously, I'm alluding a little bit to injury. You could talk about being over the cliff. Matt Judon would be somebody who I would say not due to injury, but just maybe he's past his prime. He was getting up there anyhow. New England didn't want to re-sign him. They trade him to Atlanta. Did not look like the Matt Judon of old. And it's one of those things where it's like, man, is it time to get off the Matt Judon bandwagon? That's kind of sad for me.
Yeah, he was a guy I had in a couple leagues, and I was like super pumped about the move to Atlanta. I thought Atlanta would be a lot better. I liked kind of where their defense, where their team was going to be at. Being in that division, I was like, man, he could tear it up in Atlanta this year. And it's just like, you got up to the start of the season, you're like, can I play him? Like, when can I play him? Because he just did nothing for you most of the year. He had a couple good games kind of near the end of the season, but at that point, you were pretty much off the Judon boat. If you had him, you're like, I'm not playing him unless it's a bye week and I am like desperately short on players. Like I said, I had a couple weeks where I was playing Judon over Benito early on, and then I finally was like, what am I doing? I got to get off of Judon. He's not going to get it going, and Benito just kept performing. But sometimes you just get you get stuck in those ruts. You're like, I know Judon should be better than this, and you're like, is Benito just getting lucky? And then eventually you're like, the light bulb goes off, and you're like, okay, stop fighting it, just play the guy that's playing better. It's like we kept fighting Benito's snap percentage. If you looked at it every week, you're like, God, he's just not getting, he's playing like 42%. He's playing like 48% of snaps. Like, and you're like, can he keep the sack total up? And yes, he did. It didn't matter if he only played half or less of the half. He was still getting home. So sometimes you got to just block that stuff out and go, hey, just play the guy that's playing awesome. He's playing out of his mind. Just stick with him. And Benito's another guy like you talked about.
Yeah.
He's going to be a guy that's going to be really interesting in redraft. Like a couple guys said, he was just sitting on waivers almost all year. Like, is he a guy that goes way higher than he should? Or are people still going to not believe and be like, I don't think he can repeat. I don't think he can do that again. And he just falls deep in drafts, because that's going to be really interesting.
Out of Rhythm Fantasy, we'll get to your question next. Two players, though, that it just hurts due to injury, because some injuries you're like, okay, well, we'll see you next season. The modern medicine's come a long way. I'm sure you'll be fine. And then there's some injuries where you're just like, will they play again? Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah getting injured this year, having neck issues. whenever I hear neck issues, I get freaked out with, the thoughts of paralysis, partial paralysis, just a complete, shift in how we think about this person, not as a football player, but as a human being. And do you want to see him back in the league, given how violent the position is and the game is and his health history? And then another player who you and I have talked about, I've been on his bandwagon for a year since he was a rookie. DeMarvion Overshown. I mean, this guy was tearing it up for Dallas. I mean, there was a point during the season where they were talking about, well, we're going to build the defense around Micah Parsons and Marvin Overshown. And then, was it the Cincinnati game? Is when he blew out his knee, like every single ligament got torn and then some. And there's talk like he may not even make it next season. And you and I were having the discussion. If you have him in Dynasty, or if you have him in Redraft or Dynasty rather, what are you doing with him? Are you just stashing him on IR, or are you letting him go?
I think he's going to be the first guy. I think you're going to stash him on IR, and the second you run out of IR spots or need somebody, he's going to be the first guy you end up dropping, because you're just like, even if he comes back from the injury, it's almost going to be completely unlikely that it's next year. And if he does come back next year, it's most likely going to be because the Cowboys are somehow in the playoff run and he comes back real late when it won't help you for fantasy. So, I mean, he's a guy you're probably just going to be like, oh, toss him back. And then again, with that kind of injury, you just don't know how long it's going to get. First off, are they ever going to get back to where they were, or even like a high percentage, 80, 85% of what they were? And secondly, if they do get back to that 80% or 75% or whatever, how long is that going to take? Is that going to take a year and a half? Is it going to take 2 years? I mean, on the offensive side, we've been seeing that with J.K. Dobbins. Now, did he have a little breakout this year? Yes, it was nice. But if you've been holding him for 4 or 5 years now, you're like, the breakout was nice, but do you have to admit to yourself, was it worth holding him for the last 4 years for him to have a semi breakout this year?
Right.
That I don't know, man. He was a nice little, if I took a shot on him late in my draft, or I picked him up, off the waiver wire, nice little burst. But if I've been holding on to J.K. Dobbins for 5 years to get what he did this year, I don't know if I'm really celebrating, to be honest with you. And that's where I would feel like with Overshown, I'm like, even if he does come back and play pretty well, how long is that going to be? And are you better off just getting rid of him and then hoping you can come back and grab him if he gets healthy later on? And again, I'll stash him on my IR on a bunch of leagues, but he's going to be the first guy that gets dropped as soon as I need another IR spot to open up. And I'm already looking at a couple teams that I have him in best ball on Sleeper, where anybody who plays best ball on Sleeper, please, Sleeper, fix this. They will not let you put guys on IR if you're in a best ball league. So I had a best ball league. I was in first place all year. I had major injuries at the end of the year, and it was a dynasty. And I had all these guys that I was like, oh my God, do I drop them to try to take a shot where my team is like half as good as it was 2 weeks ago going into the playoffs? Or do I just hold on to all these guys who are going to be studs when they come back? So most of my hell, but he's one of the first guys after we do our rookie draft, and I'm trying to make space on my roster in a best ball league on Sleeper. He's going to probably get dropped.
No, these are very good points. All right, out of Rhythm Fantasy, what are your thoughts on drafting rookies? Do you pass on them or draft them like Latu? He spent $16 on him. So rookies, for me, it really comes down to, what are their snaps going to look like from the get-go? Are they in a position where they're slated to be the starting edge rusher, starting middle linebacker, safety, what have you? Latu was not slated to be that starter. He was more going to be of a potential rotation piece there. You look like a guy like Jared Verse, however, he was going to be slated as the starting guy, and he finished as a top 30 defensive lineman in Fantasy Pro scoring. It really varies. I personally, for redraft, man, it's hard for me to draft a rookie. I don't have a problem picking up a rookie. Shout out Tyler Newman, New York Giants safety, who went on IR, but very big fan of him in the pre-draft process. I was hurting at defensive back. He was available, and he helped me during the course of the season until he got hurt. That's just my thought. What are your thoughts on drafting rookies?
Yeah, I'll jump on redraft. I am like rarely taking a rookie in redraft. In Dynasty, yes, because I think if I think the guys can have a long, good career, I'm probably not overpaying a ton for him. Now, a guy I absolutely overpaid and slightly got burned this year, but I'm hoping I get a nice little bounce back here too, with Junior Colson for Michigan, went to the Chargers. I thought for sure he was going to have a monster year. And we saw that linebacker crew was a little bit of a mess for the Chargers. I think if he comes in healthy right off the bat at the beginning of the year, I think things might have looked different. We saw Deion Henley ended up kind of stealing that role because he had every opportunity because there was nobody else really making the plays there. But Colson was a guy I got burned on. I took him in some redraft, but I took him late. But he was a guy I overspent in Dynasty, but I also don't feel terrible about it just yet because I do think he has a shot with Henley to be like the top two guys there next year. And he's still young, so I do like him. I wanted to bring this up because I saw this on X today, Jorge. Really interesting stat. At Colts Topic on X, his name's Jeremiah. It's at Colts Topic is his handle. He put out a Latu versus verse. See what I did there? With the Colts Rams, kind of took like breaking down their season because there's a lot of Colts fans that are real kind of hurt and kind of trashing Latu, going, "Oh, we screwed up. We should have took verse. We should have took verse." Now, I think verse is great. I do think if they took him over Latu, I totally would have agreed with it. I had those guys right next to each other in my rankings. They were behind Colson. Colson was my number one rookie. I had Latu at 2 and verse at 3. So that was at the beginning of the year. So if you want to break down the snaps, these guys were a lot closer than you think. For how good of a year most people think Colson verse had versus Latu, snaps verse 789 to Latu's 595 because Latu took him a while before they really got him in the rotation. Sacks verse 4.5, Latu 4. Sack percentage, Latu 1.1% to 1% for verse. So slight edge there. Pressure 76 for verse to 42 for Latu. Pressure percentage 16.8 for verse, 11.9 for Latu. Hits 18 for verse, 12 for Latu. 11 tackles for loss for verse, 5 for Latu. 2 forced fumbles for verse, 3 for Latu. So the stats much, much closer for playing almost 200 less snaps. I'm telling you, people, if Latu's out there in the offseason, if people let him go, if you're in a league that has like short benches and so people don't really roster rookies in your IDP leagues, Adebayo, Bam Adebayo is gone for the Colts. He's a free agent. I don't think they re-sign him. There is a very good chance Latu is the guy starting next year for the Colts at DN. And he showed enough promise this year that it's a buy. He's a buy right now. And I love Verse, and Verse had a great year, but that shows you how close they were with him playing much less of a snap percentage, how similar they were in stats this year. So just a little thought out there for people. If you love Verse, you also should be loving Latu.
100%. I think Latu is I believe he was my number one rated defensive lineman just because I wasn't worried about that neck injury in college as I think other pundits were. But I 100%. I mean, you can't go wrong with both, but show Latu a little bit more respect when it comes to his performance when he got the opportunity. We could go down the list here and talk about all sorts of players here, looking at the rankings. But, I think our time better served for the rest of this episode, JT, is let's talk about free agents that are just, surprising free agents from IDP purposes. And then we'll get to the sack lunch. I know you're waiting with bated breath.
I'm waiting just so I can get disappointed so you can tell me you beat me and I know I got to take a pie to the face. But hey, it's like when I put in my football bets and right as I put my lineups in before game time hits on Sunday, I've got that anticipation. I feel like I'm going to win. I feel like it's going to be a good day. And I just immediately get disappointed. So I'm already ready for it. I have a lot of practice, Jorge. So if I end up losing, I'm ready for it. But let's talk about some of these. Let's talk about some of these unrestricted free agents, because these are going to be some guys you're going to want to look at over the offseason to kind of see where you feel like they end up landing, if that raises their value, lowers their value. Couple pretty interesting names out there.
Yeah. So let's start with the also popular linebacker, Bobby Wagner. First of all, if I'm Washington, I'm not letting him walk out the door. So but he is a free agent. He signed a 1-year deal in Washington, and as a Washington fan and seeing the everything every week, listening to all the reports, listening to all the radio shows, yada yada yada. Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, and Bobby Wagner are like the 3 most influential people on the roster there in Washington in terms of leadership. I would be very surprised if they let Bobby Wagner go. But you never know. So he is a free agent. I would still redraft. If Bobby Wagner is in the league, I am going to try to get Bobby Wagner as my linebacker. That is, whether he was in Seattle, he went to LA, came back to Seattle. Now he's in Washington, like whatever. The dude is, if there was ever like an IDP Mount Rushmore for like this century, and I'm very specific to this century, he's on it. You know what I mean? At least for me, one of the few faces on that Mount Rushmore. We talked about Zach Bond earlier, as far as like what are our expectations for redraft and Dynasty? Do you go after him? Do you not? Eric Kendricks. I personally think for redraft purposes, I would rather just get somebody else than Eric Kendricks. He's getting another year older. Wasn't really super productive. Yeah, that's my thought there. But the next name here, this is an interesting one. Jamien Sherwood. We saw what he did with the Jets this year, how super productive he was. But a lot of that came because C.J. Mosley was dealing with was like a hamstring injury for most of the year or some type of injury.
Yeah, and then he had multiple injuries. He ended up coming back and hurting his neck. And then that was when he kind of that's when they kind of put him on IR and was like, he's older. That's probably not a great idea. And then they kind of pulled him there. And Sherwood, I tell you what, he's going to be right with that Zach Bond. You look at his numbers, you look at the production, you're like, dang, real nice. But then you're like, is it a 1-year wonder type of thing? Was it a perfect storm of like he just ended up being in the perfect spot where he could really put together, quality stats? And again, and the thing is always, I think, to keep in mind when these teams are looking at these guys defensively, obviously they're looking at, do these guys fit our defensive system, especially when they're free agents. Guys aren't just going to sign a guy because he had a good year. Like, he's got to fit their system defensively. It's a little bit different, I think, defensively than offensively. A lot of times offense, you're just going out and getting the best guy. You're just signing the best guy you can sign. Defensively, there is a little bit of that, but I think they want guys that fit their system. So looking at, coaches are going to look at how, what Sherwood does best and what was his best metrics and say, is that the guy we need for our team? And then the big question again, we talked about, how much is somebody willing to pay these guys? Are they willing to give them a multi-year contract when they only have basically 1 year to show of anything in their career? Or are these guys going to get like maybe a 1 year deal or a 2-year deal just to kind of prove it? So that's something that's going to be interesting because Sherwood was a lot like Benito in that he was a guy that people picked up, but people were still a little like, even mid of the year, because the Mosley situation was so up in the air. People were like, do I pick him up? Is he going to be like a 1 week or 2 week guy for me? Or is like, am I wasting my time? And I tell you what, there was a couple leagues I didn't pull the trigger on him very early because I was like, oh, Mosley's going to be back. I'll be fine. I don't really have the roster spots. I'm going to have to drop somebody else I like. and I was kicking myself when he ended up just basically holding the job the rest of the year. So I definitely missed out on him a couple times when I was staring him down, like, oh, should I pick him up? And I hesitated and I blew it. So it's going to be interesting to see, do the Jets, Mosley, do they let like a guy like Mosley go and re-sign Sherwood, knowing that he was good in their system, but also, again, new coaching staff for the Jets. Like, what's going to happen there? So I think that one is a real, him and Bond, I think, are super interesting to see if they go back to where they were at. I think Wagner, if you're Washington, like you said, I think you got to resign Wagner. He's older. He's not going to be looking for like a 4 or 5 year deal. He'll probably take a 1 or 2 year deal. I just think if you're Washington, I think you got to resign him.
100%. Still going down this list here. Let's get into a cluster of players here. I don't want to go just one by one because obviously we respect all your time and we're running out of time here for the show. But like Robert Spillane, I think he's shown enough consistency that I would draft him if he returns to Vegas, as well as where he goes elsewhere.
He's a guy that if he goes somewhere else, like just jump in there. Sorry, Jorge. If he goes somewhere else, I still have confidence in him. Unlike the other two guys where they're like a 1 year, like, oh, I hope they can repeat. I've seen enough Spillane when he was on the Steelers. Even though he didn't get a full chance with Steelers, and now on the Raiders, to me, he's just a baller. I think that guy's good. And again, I don't ever think you have to overpay for Spillane. He's a really good player, but he doesn't have that super big name recognition. So I always think he's going to be a good value.
The next 3 players at linebacker that I want to cluster in here, and I'm going to give you, we'll play a little game here. And the first assumption is they're on new teams. The second assumption is they're on the teams that they are currently, where they were last year. If EJ Speed, Nick Bolton, and Ernest Jones are on brand new teams this year, which one out of the 3 do you feel most comfortable rostering based off of their performances up until this point in their careers?
Which one I feel the most confident?
Yeah.
So this one's a little tough for me, and Nick Bolton's my guy. I love Nick Bolton, my Mizzou guy. So he's one of my all-time favorite players. Obviously, a little injuries, still good this last year, but not if you got him in redraft, you probably paid way more than what you got out of production from this year. So you're probably pretty upset with him. Ernest Jones is just a very interesting situation. I mean, either teams just hate this guy, he doesn't get along, or something's going on. But like for him to get moved 2 or 3 times in 1 year is pretty insane in the NFL, especially if you're good. But the one thing you could say about Ernest Jones, he's produced everywhere he's been. So he's a guy that if he ends up wherever he ends up, I assume he's going to be good there. Now, the big question is he going to stick with a team? And I think that is part of the issue. I think teams are worried about, can we re-sign him and how much are we going to have to pay him? Because I think he's going to ask for a lot. So that's going to be an interesting one. He's probably the one I would say you could take with the most confidence in that his numbers are going to be solid. I would take Bolton in the fact that long-term dynasty,
right?
I think if he ends up on a different team, he'll end up on a different team and stay there for a while. He's a pretty loyal dude. Ernest Jones makes me nervous in that he's going to keep getting traded or move around and eventually piss somebody off. And then all of a sudden you're like, what happened to him? So short-term redraft, Ernest Jones, probably if I'm dynasty, I'm going to go with the fact that Bolton has been solid. He's been good. If I already have him, I'm probably holding him because I probably can't get the value I want out of him anyway. EJ Speed makes me nervous, real nervous. It just feels like everything worked out for him to have a fantastic fantasy this year in Indy, but I watched a lot of, I went to every one but two Colts game I didn't go to this year, but I watched every other game on TV if I wasn't there. He wasn't really good. He made a lot of tackles, but it was just because they were on the field constantly and he was making a lot of tackles downfield. It wasn't like he was like coming up, shedding blockers, making plays. It was almost like, oh, here's these guys wide open. Like, I'm the guy here. I have to make the tackle now. And the problem was when he was hurt, we saw the guys that were much less rated than him and much less experienced almost put up the same tackles numbers as him. So to me, he's the most expendable guy. And I know Chris Ballard ran it back last year, and we saw what happened with the Colts this year, missing the playoffs again. I just can't see him completely doing that again this year. He gave it a shot last year, and they missed the playoffs again. I think they've got to make some changes. I absolutely think the Colts will go linebacker, at least if they don't go in the first round. I can see them going linebacker second or third round to replace speed.
Okay, now with these, assuming these three linebackers do not go anywhere and they stay with their current teams, is Ernest Jones for you, or are you still sticking with Bolton like you were in this other scenario?
I still like Bolton. I think this defense has gotten better, so his numbers have gone down a bit. Right. But I'm liking what I do kind of like what Seattle's doing. If he sticks there, they're going to be probably, I have to be honest with you, they're probably going to be almost right next to each other in my rankings. I think they're going to be very, very close to my rankings. Me personally, because my love for Bolton, I'm probably going to lean a little bit more that he's been there. It's a safe bet that he ends up staying the green dot and is kind of the guy there if they re-sign him. Because I assume that if they re-sign him, they're going to give him a 3 or 4 year deal. I'm on Bolton first. Just again, the only thing that makes me nervous is not Ernest Jones' play. Makes me nervous is how often he got moved in 1 year. I don't want to invest a lot in a dynasty league in a guy that could easily, like we see a Deontay Johnson situation where all of a sudden the guy's like, we're expecting 1 million targets. Everybody wants, we're like, dude, this is going to be a phenomenal year for him. And now he can't stand on a freaking team because he pisses everybody off. And now he's absolutely murdered his value going into the offseason. I mean, absolutely murdered his value. Is Ernest Jones that type of guy? I don't know. I haven't been in the locker room. I haven't heard those things, but there's got to be something there. Now, if a team goes out and just gives him a monster deal, to tag him up, all concerns gone. I'm probably taking Ernest Jones. Like if they give him if the Seahawks just go, oh yeah, dude, we're giving you the bag, I'm taking Ernest Jones because now you go, hey, he was in the locker room. They obviously have no problems with him. They're willing to sign him. That would knock a lot of that worry off for me. If the Seahawks were like, boom, we'll do it.
All right, let's talk about a linebacker that you tell me if you're for Dynasty willing to go after. Maybe not give up, the bank here, but like somebody that you really have faith in. Or is it somebody that not excited? Christian Roseboom, linebacker, Rams, free agent this year. Thoughts on him?
So Roseboom's another one of those. God, if you would have told me last season before this year that I'm going to be playing Christian Roseboom on a team that has a chance to win the championship, and I'm going to be starting him without hesitation every week. Right. In 2024, I'd been like, dude, there's no way I'm playing for a championship. If that's the guy I'm starting every week. I picked him up off the waiver wire the year before, 2023, probably week 10 or so. My team was absolutely getting murdered with injuries and bye weeks. And I'm literally like looking through our waiver wires and I'm like, I'm looking at Roseboom. And at this point, he's playing like 50% of snaps, maybe. And a lot of games he's playing like in the 40s. And I was looking, there was no one out there. I was like, God, at least he's playing some. And it was at the point where I was like, I'm just desperate to get a guy in the lineup that might score me more than a 0. And I picked him up and put him in. And I thought, dude, honestly, Roseboom was one of those guys at the beginning of the year when we were making cuts in my league. Him and Benito were two of the last guys. I was like, ooh, do we keep these guys? And I was like, you know what? We should keep them just in case. We had some young guys we liked, and I was like, maybe we cut the young guys and keep some of these guys. And so we did, and it ended up being huge. Roseboom back on the Rams, I like a lot because they seem to really like him this year. Once Reader got hurt, who I think is also a free agent, once he got hurt and then Roseboom kind of took over, it felt like they really liked him. Everybody kept saying he's going to get replaced. He's going to get replaced, and he never did. So I like him on the Rams. Now, him leaving as a free agent makes me nervous. Makes me nervous. He's one of those guys I could absolutely see getting a deal somewhere else and then completely disappearing. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, he's back to that like 35% snap share and he's not really even rosterable. I do not have a lot of confidence in him just because if he doesn't go back to the Rams, I'm super nervous that he's going to be better somewhere else.
No, I 100% agree. Let's, edge rusher. Look, it's Khalil Mack, but again, it's one of those things where it's like, how many younger players are ahead of him on your rankings that you could?
Yeah, Dynasty. He's down there now. I mean, even though he's had an okay year the last 2 years, he's dropping down for me. We'll see where he feels like he's about ready to be on the Von Miller arc. Where he's just going to sign somewhere where he thinks he can win a championship. They're going to like put him in for pass rushing downs and he's going to play like 30% of snaps. And you're just hoping they're hoping he gets a couple sacks here and there. I just don't know how much a full-time guy he's going to be after this year. He makes me super nervous moving forward. God, this isn't a great pass rushing free agent market. I mean, Dante Fowler. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you're Washington, are you re-signing Dante Fowler? And if you're not, is somebody else taking the shot? I mean, he had a come up year for a guy that was a really high. I'm pretty sure he was a first round pick, if not a top 15 pick. But is an older guy now, but had a pretty spectacular year for a guy that didn't play a ton of snap percentage. If he moves from Washington, is he just totally off your radar again?
Yeah, for me, it would make sense for Washington to sign him to another 2-year deal or something along those lines. Maybe give him more guaranteed money, and less versus less overall money. I look, he did great. Dan Quinn's system obviously fit him very well, but again, a lot of years of not doing great. And then a few years of, especially this year, doing really well. Again, spike performances, I get a little concerned about. But I'll say, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was looking through the list and I just had a guy that just popped out at me that's going to be interesting. And that's Joseph Asay from Cincinnati. He had a nice little push at the end of the year for the Bengals. He looked kind of good. I didn't realize he was a free agent. It'd be interesting to see if somebody, not that he's the same type of player, so don't think I'm making this exact comparison, but is he a guy that's going to be like, hey, Van Ginkel didn't get a ton of playing time, but man, when he played, he kind of showed us some shine there in Miami, and someone says, hey, let's bring him in and give him a shot. Is he a guy like that where somebody goes, ooh, he showed us enough on tape, and man, he was pretty good at the end of the year. He was kind of stuck behind some vets. What if we pick him up on like a pretty cheap 1 year, 2 year deal and give him a shot? I think there's some spots that, I mean, he's not going to be high in my rankings by any means, but he's a guy I would be interested in taking a late round flyer on, depending on where he ends up. If he ends up on a team where like they lose a DN, and I'm throwing this off the top of my head, I think he's coming back, but like Vegas, what if he ended up going to like Vegas and is opted Max Crosby? That would be interesting to me. If something like that happened, what do you think? Do you like him at all? He was just a guy I picked up late in the season and started playing in a few leagues where I had to play a couple defensive linemen, and he gave me some nice performances down the stretch.
I like your analogy with Van Ginkel as far as like going someplace to get. I do like the Las Vegas landing spot, though. However, if we're talking about that, pairing, first of all, in general, pairing defensive lineman opposite an elite defensive lineman is always going to benefit you because you get more one-on-one opportunities versus getting double teamed. The issue in Vegas is, Malcolm Kuntz, who I was very high on, he went out on IR. Another free agent here, Clavon Chason, came on strong. Does Vegas bring him back on a cheap deal? So now you have Asai, Kuntz, and Chason, competing for the position. And again, like I said in the beginning of all this, snaps, playing time. What are you going to see? That being said, I don't think I would draft him per se, but he's definitely somebody that I would keep tabs on, depending on where he went. Now, the real question is, if he stayed in Cincinnati and we saw the push to get him more playing time, is he somebody that could potentially push to play opposite of Trey Hendrickson, in which case that bumps his value up, I think, even more.
I think it does a lot because he's a guy I kind of was looking into because of where he kind of went at the end of the year, just trying to like get my head wrap around. Okay, where do I know this guy from? He's guy goes out. Here's a little stats for anybody who doesn't know him. Just 24 years old, and he turns 25 in April. So he's just going to be 25, coming off his rookie deal. 4 years in the league. Was a former third-round pick in 2021. Ended the season for you. I'm just breaking down kind of what he did the last 6 weeks of the year after he started getting a little more playing time. The last 6 weeks of the season, he ended up getting 4.5 sacks, piled up. I think it's over 20 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, a pass defense, and that was in the last 6 weeks. And that was basically 90% of his production for the year. And it all came in the last 6 weeks of the season. Like I said, had 3 straight games with a sack, missed one, then had a sack and a half a sack to end out the year. Really solid year. Missed some games, was a little banged up. But he's a guy still real young. Former third-round pick. Former Texas guy. He's a guy that's going to be intriguing to me to see if somebody pounces on him. If he goes back to the Bengals, I like it a lot. But he's also a guy I'm going to keep an eye on where he signs in the offseason. Like you said, I would maybe take a late round flyer on him, or if he's a guy, like I said, he's going to probably be on your waivers in a lot of dynasty leagues. He's a guy, if you are in dynasty and you run waivers in the summer, seeing where he lands up, he's a guy that's going to be one of those first guys I'm going to look at, maybe putting a little money on, a little ad, and try to pick him up possibly to see what happens with him. He's intriguing to me.
JT, what do you know? We're already at an hour and a half into the show. Shocker that you and I are going.
I told you we didn't even need a script. We'd go an hour and a half without question.
I love it. Folks, before we get to the results of the sack lunch competition we had this year, let me give you a little peek behind the curtain as far as what's going on here at Fantasy and Frames in terms of IDP. Shoot the Gap, we will be back the Wednesday after the Super Bowl. So I believe that's the 12th of February. And we're going to be talking IDP Dynasty targets. We're going to be talking NFL prospects, leading up to the NFL draft. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things. The Dynasty targets, the risers and fallers from this past year. Obviously, you can check out JT's Dynasty IDP rankings at DLF. Find them up at fantasyandframes.com. And obviously the mock drafts are going to be coming, but, we're going to take, much like the other Fantasy and Frames shows, with the exception to a few, we're going to take a little sabbatical and kind of recharge and do some stuff. But like I said, after the Super Bowl, it's on. We're on, and we're just going to keep cranking out content and, being there for you all. So just, a lot of these names we're talking about in terms of free agents, they're going to probably come up in some respect or another for Dynasty. And then obviously as we get closer to redraft season, we'll shift our focus there. But, we got a lot of stuff. We got, I keep harping on this, but like Dynasty targets, prospect profiles. Then as soon as the NFL's draft over, we're going to have rookie profiles, because I'm not a big believer in like putting out rookie profiles before the NFL draft, because they're not rookies, they're prospects. Tell me when they're on the team, and then I'll give you an analysis of what I think about them now that they're on an NFL team. So just look over for that. Jamie's in the chat. Let's go.
Yeah, Jamie said, "Let's go now." He's like, "Let's go another hour. Let's do it." I was also going to say, I'm doing a lot of prospect profiles right now for DLF. I just wrote one on Aston GT, just wrote one on Shadur Sanders, just wrote one on Ted McMillan. So I'm doing all the offensive guys right now. That's really my next month of everything. But once we actually get into the draft, that's when I dive more in the defensive guys. I don't dive deep heavy into the defensive IDP guys until I know where they're going, because it's so hard to figure out. Like, I'll put out my rankings on DLF for my rookie rankings before the draft, but it greatly changes once you know where these guys go and where they end up, and kind of you can see into the spotlight of possibly, what playing time might be in the future. So I definitely, and we'll talk about that on the show too as we get closer when we get going. But I definitely will have that coming down the line. But I always do my offensive guys first, kind of get that stuff out there, try to get those people that are looking at going into the draft, because a lot more people look at the offensive guys. A lot of guys don't really get heavy into the IDP defensive guys until once we know where they're at. So we'll obviously talk about that. Jamie's, he's got Risa Singleton going back to college. I know. I had him already on the trigger to take at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round in a bunch of my fantasy drafts. So gonna have to change that up as he's going back to school. Good for him though. Deep class. He should be one of the top guys in the 2026 draft. Love Singleton out of Penn State. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. A lot of fun. Plan on doing a ton of deep dive, not only IDP, but offensive guys here leading up to the draft. Jorge, I say it all the time. I love football season, but man, I love the draft. I love the NFL draft. It's like one of my favorite. I'm such a big college guy too, that I just love that merge of all the college prospects and see where they fit with the pros and all the guys I love from college. I want to see where they get drafted. I'm certain guys, I'm hoping they go to my favorite teams, my favorite NFL teams, or if they don't, I want to see them in a good spot where I can still root for them. I don't want to see him on one of my hated rivals where I'm like, dang it, I want to root for him and he's on a team I hate. So it's always a great time of year. So getting that little decompression. I said in the chat, Jamie said something about the Steelers. They had me in a deep depression here last week. I'm not going to lie. The way they ended the year absolutely was brutal to me. Sucked it up here. We're getting ready, getting close to the Super Bowl. I'm back on track. Talking IDP always helps out, but yeah, I'm getting ready for just like that. I'm getting ready for draft season.
So needless to say, whether you're at fantasyandframes.com checking out our content, or you're on DLF and all the hard work that JT is doing over there, both entities, you're going to find a lot of IDP content coming at you really quickly. And of course, we'll probably do some evergreen episodes, do some intro to IDP stuff, maybe do a couple startup IDP drafts. There's a lot of stuff we can do, folks. The important thing is we're going to be there for you, and have fun along the way. So we appreciate you joining the ride. We would really appreciate, though, wherever you listen to podcasts, primarily on Apple or Spotify or YouTube Music, subscribe specifically to the Shoot the Gap podcast, because that is where all of our shows are going to be going on at this point forward in 2025 and beyond. But yeah, so, and JT, if memory serves you correctly, your show, The Stew with JT Brew, again, another area we're going to be covering IDP and offense and all sorts of
going to do all kinds of rookie stuff here in the off season. Do mostly gambling stuff during the year. If you're going to watch the national championship game, Ohio State, Notre Dame, it's coming up Monday. If you're going to watch that game, we're going to do a live Stew with JT Brew broadcast before the game, 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central Time. Me and my buddy Benny D. We might get Toast to jump in there from the Around the Ice Hockey podcast. He's one of our friends who also loves college football. We might get him in there. We're going to break down the entire championship game, what bets we like. We're going to go through some wild bets. There's a ton out there. Whenever you get down to a single game left in the year, you can get a crazy amount of different bets. We're going to go through all kinds of stuff to look for, wild ones you can bet, things we like. So check us out on Fantasy and Frames. Monday the 20th, 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central. I think the game's 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central. So we're going to go on about an hour before the game, and we're just going to ham it up. You got bets you like, things you want to talk about, bring them to us. We're going to talk about that, kind of do our final wrap show for the year as far as our college betting show. And then, like I said, the off season here on the Stu and JT Brew, we're going to just get into a ton of rookie draft work. We're going to get in a bunch of that stuff. And then if you're into hockey, people, or are you interested about getting into hockey, check out Around the Ice here on Fantasy and Frames. We usually do it Tuesday nights. We've got some scheduling conflicts coming up, so we are going to be on some maybe Wednesday or Thursdays. So definitely hit the notification button so you know when we go on. What we're going to do, we talk fantasy hockey, we talk real life hockey, we talk gambling. Jamie was in the chat saying he lost on the Blackhawks. I said, buddy, you should have been on our Toast Takes tonight because we won again. We hit again on Toast Takes. So get on there. Follow my buddy at Toast Clark on the X. He puts out his Toast Takes, his hockey bets every day. He's got some fun ones. Even if you're not a big hockey person, you know what's going on. He's got some fun ones you can put in for $1 or $5 to win like 500. $1,000. He puts in some crazy fun goal parlays, stuff like that. And hey, if you just want to get into it, see what it's all about, and maybe pique your interest about getting into a hockey league next year, make sure you check us out on Around the Ice.
And again, you could subscribe to the Around the Ice podcast. We have our hockey channel for Fantasy and Frames at FIF Hockey over on X, where we stream the shows. And folks, not only is it informative hockey information, it's just a very fun show. These guys are fantastic. You sit around and you're listening to them talk, and you're just like, I may not know a lot about hockey, but God damn it, this is entertaining as hell. So, eventually through osmosis, it'll come through to you, and it's a really good time. So, shouting out to you, JT, and all the work that you, Toast and Aaron are doing is fantastic. Okay, here we are.
Let's have it. Give it to me. All right. I'm ready. I'm prepared. Let's hear the results.
So we missed a few episodes. Keep that in mind. Okay. So I'm going to start with the episodes where we voted. Week 2, I had Jalen Phillips as getting a sack. You had Alex Highsmith. Phillips had 0. Highsmith had 1. Victory goes to you. Week 3, I had Will McDonald getting a sack. You had Kwity Paye getting a sack. Kwity Paye had half a sack, so that counts. But Will McDonald had 2 sacks, so I'll take the victory there.
It's the win.
I know. Week 4, I had Liatu Latu taking a sack. You had Nick Herbig. Neither of them got sacks, so it was a draw there. Week 5, I had Aziz Ojulari. You had Khalil Mack. Mack had 1 sack. Ojulari had 2, so I'll take the victory there. And then all of a sudden,
I got it right, and I still lost.
Then it turns into the JT massacre for the rest of the season, because week 10, I went Montez Sweat. You went Trayvon Walker, 1 sack to 0. Week 14, I went Carl Granderson. You went Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward, 2 sacks to 0. And then from week 15, 16, and 17, we basically we're null and void, because we either we didn't do a sack lunch or we both got zeros. And so after doing the tally of just weekly matchups, who won, congratulations, JT, 3-2. You are the winner for sack lunch for the 2024 IDP Fantasy Football season here on Shoot the Gap.
Barely, but I'll take it. It was a good battle, Jorge. Good battle.
So, needless to say, the Saturday before the Super Bowl, I'll be taking a pie in the face on our Super Bowl pre-show. So, look forward to that. Congratulations, JT. Congratulations to all you out there who had success playing IDP Fantasy Football. Thank you for tuning in, staying up late with us on our Wednesdays. Like I said, we got a lot of stuff here at Fantasy and Frames for IDP coming your way. And, we really, JT, we really owe these people a lot, just because of, look who's popping off in the chat every single week and
Yeah, been a
Ask
great group, man. Great group. Everybody jumping in, asking questions, interacting. I tell you what, every week I love doing this show. I have a great time. It's a great way to finish off the Wednesday night hangout. Wednesday night's like a good late night for me. I don't have to get up early the next day, so I don't mind when we go late. I know you got to get up. You got a little one, a little rougher than me, but I've had a great time. I just want to thank you, Jorge, for putting me on the show this year. Jumping on the Shoot the Gap show. I've been doing IDP for a long time. Really loved it. This is the first year I've really gotten a full-time show doing IDP, and I had a great time talking about it, great time doing plays and fades on the IDP side of things. Really fun. Really looking forward to the next year, 2025, and being part of the team and seeing everything we can do here at Fantasy and Frames, because I feel like got a really solid group here with a lot of good shows, a lot of good content all around. And I think more and more people are starting to figure out we're here and getting to know that we got some knowledge over here. We got some good stuff. So I'm loving it. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you on board. And like you said, folks, we got a lot of content coming your way here at Fantasy and Frames as a whole, whether it's our fantasy football, fantasy hockey, multiple shows, multiple podcasts. Nothing's changing, folks. Like, we were there for you in season, multiple avenues, articles, rankings. None of that changes. We're still going to be there for you, this spring and summer, and we're back at it in the fall. So we're not going anywhere, and we hope that you don't go anywhere either, and you enjoy all the content we put out here. And rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what we could be doing better, or what you just flat out enjoy. We really appreciate the feedback. So,
hey, if you got questions, anything like that, right, Jorge and Austin, just hit us up. Hit me at JT Orange, at Jorge B Edwards. Hit us up.
Yeah.
We'll answer. We'll throw in our 2 cents just like we do on the show. So if you miss talking to us, just hit us up. We'll talk to you on the old social media.
There you go. So, JT, it's truly been an honor sharing the airways with you this year. So thank you very much. Everybody else, thank you very much for supporting Shoot the Gap and Fantasy and Frames. And we will see you. At least, JT, will you be joining the Super Bowl?
I'm gonna be there on the Super Bowl, so I'm looking forward to the show. Super pumped about it. I'm gonna bring some gambling insight. Talk about some of my favorite and off the wall Super Bowl bets, because like the national championship game, you get all kinds of crazy things you can jump on when there's only one game in town. So always some cool stuff you can look up and kind of talk about that. So I'm gonna have a nice little list of things in case people are looking for something a little wild, even if you're not a big gambler. You're like, I want to throw a little bit of money on this game, sprinkle $1 or $5, throw some cool parlays. Got my JT parlay play of the day, which is usually pretty long odds, but man, I've been right there with a lot of them this year. My friends joke, they're like, dude, I've never seen somebody hit more 5 out of 6 or 7 out of 8 parlays than you do. So a lot of those, but let's get one in the Super Bowl. Didn't do great last year in the Super Bowl, but man, I crushed the 2 years before that. So looking to get a nice little bounce back in the Super Bowl this year. I've got some crazy bets sitting out there on some teams right now already, some Super Bowl bets, but hopefully we'll talk about that at the show as well.
Sounds like a plan. I'll see you there, folks. We hope you see you there also. So for JT and Jorge, you all have a great rest of your evening and rest of your week.